Hey there, Podcast Aquanauts. It's your host, Casey, here again, speaking to you from I guess it's the cockpit aquatic this time. This upcoming episode of the show is something of a fun bonus and an experiment all wrapped into one. When I conceived the idea to create a podcast for the Tennessee Aquarium, I wanted it to encompass everything we do here. Not just the animals and exhibits that are probably the main draw for the vast majority of our visitors, but also the important work at the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute and, as you'll soon discover, the films we showcase at the Tennessee Aquarium IMAX 3D Theater. With a 6-story screen and one of the only cutting-edge IMAX with laser audiovisual suites in the Southeast, basically, giant screen films look better here than anywhere else on Earth, quite literally. Our theater has become the place to see large-format movies and a destination for cinephiles, and on this show, I wanted to connect with the folks involved in making the films that we show here. In the case of this episode, a rare opportunity presented itself for me to sit down with Greg "Boss" Wooldridge, a 3-term commanding officer for the Blue Angels, the Navy's much-loved Flight Demonstration Squadron. He's also one of the executive producers for the IMAX film The Blue Angels 3D, which will be playing in our theater throughout February of 2025. Our discussion, however, has the kind of legs, or wings, I guess, to remain interesting long after this film has left our theater. Wooldridge has a lot of insights to offer about his time in the cockpit, but also the tremendous work that goes on the ground to make what the Blues do in the air possible. I hope you enjoy listening to him as much as I enjoyed talking to him. Anyway, let's take off, shall we? Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Podcast Aquatic, the official podcast of the Tennessee Aquarium. Today, we are doing a special episode of the podcast. Normally, we talk about aquatic life here at the aquarium and some of the work that we do out with our conservation scientists. But today, we're going to do a little bit of a turnabout, and we're going to be speaking to Captain Greg "Boss" Wooldridge, a former commanding officer.
Commanding officer, flight leader, player coach
for the Blue Angels. Now, the reason we're doing this is the aquarium's IMAX 3D Theater is about to be showing, or probably will be showing by the time this episode airs, the film also called The Blue Angels, of which Boss is the executive producer.
One of the executive
producers, and we had the opportunity to bring him in. So. Welcome.
Thank you, Casey. I'm glad to be here.
And let's begin with just, for people who are maybe unaware, what are the Blue Angels?
The Blue Angels, 6 Navy F-18 fighter jets that showcase what naval aviation, the planes that fly off ships, basically, what that is, what it means, and the precision, the sharpness, the crispness of what naval aviation is all about, and in the form of 6 painted blue jets that fly in formation doing maneuvers, and it comprises about a 45-minute show, and the team travels all over the country, sometimes out of the country, putting on these shows to bring hope and joy and goodwill to the people of the United States.
And now maneuvers almost doesn't do it justice. So you say aerial maneuvers, the kinds of things that you and the members of that squad do are just defy all reason. They don't seem like they should be possible.
Yeah. One of the narration quips is that the Blue Angels are going to show you something that all Navy pilots do. Well, not really. No, I mean, we practice hours and hours and hours and hours to learn these maneuvers, and they're just, again, showcasing capability of the airplanes and of the pilots especially. So it's not normal, most of it, but it involves a lot of practice, a lot of attention to the safety regime you have to be in, and probably most importantly is the trust you develop between pilots, because when you get down to 12 to 18 inches apart at those speeds with those big, heavy sets of metal airplanes, you have to have a lot of trust between each other.
18 inches, you said that I looked this up beforehand, knowing that 18 inches was the distance. That's only about 3.5 pairs of aviator sunglasses stacked end to end. And you have to consider that an F-18 Hornet is a multi-million-dollar aircraft, and not more important even than that, you have an invaluable pilot inside. I can't imagine the nerves that you must have to do something like that at those speeds.
Yeah, it's a building block approach, Casey. We start off at, you come in from the fleet, what we call the fleet, the standard Navy pilots 6 to 10 feet apart. By the time we start the show season, we're about 3 feet apart. So it's building block, because we go to the deserts of Southern California. There's an airfield there, obviously, around the 1st of January, and we'll start flying twice a day, 6 days a week, learning these maneuvers, getting comfortable with the spacing, the distance apart, and the profiles of the maneuvers. So it takes a long time. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of dedication, a lot of overcoming what appears to be a setback and your self-doubts, your fears, getting rid of those with this intense training. And again, the trust you have between each other, developing that trust. So it takes a while to get down to that kind of tolerance, the distance tolerance.
Sure. Well, and let's give a little bit of background for you. So you were and I've already forgotten the term. I wanted to say commanding officer.
Yeah.
You said it was...
Well, you command the squadron, you take responsibility for everything that happens.
Sure.
But you're also in the number one airplane, the lead jet. So you're the flight leader and commanding officer.
Okay. So let's give some context here. So when were you a member of the Angels, or the Blues, I should say?
The Blues, yeah. That's either one. I came to the team as the flight leader, as the commander. Prerequisite to that is that you have commanded a squadron before. So it's later in your career as a naval officer or Navy pilot. About my 17th year, I think it was, 17th, 18th year, I was about to finish command of another squadron, an F-18 squadron, on a ship, on an aircraft carrier. And they asked for applicants to come and try this if you thought you might want to do it. A lot of guys and gals put their applications in. I became a finalist, and then got selected. So that was late in my career. The wingmen, the people that fly around me, are usually in the Navy about 7, 8, 9 years maybe. That's when they can be chosen to take up a wing position.
Okay.
So you have a lot of flying in other airplanes or in other venues, if you will, before you get to the Blue Angels.
Yeah, this isn't your first time up in an aircraft.
Not at all, no. But I'll tell you a bit of irony is that the qualifications and the trials to become a Blue Angel involve no flying.
Really?
Yeah, it's all about personality.
Oh.
We want to have personalities that will mesh between each other, because we're on the road 300 days out of the year. We're with each other more than we are our families. And we want to have a personality that is sincere and genuine in interacting with the public, because that's our ambassadors of goodwill is one of our main center point missions, if you will.
Yeah, the Blue Angels, they seem like an almost unbelievable resource in terms of public relations to the citizens of the country, I guess. And also you mentioned internationally, so as ambassadors for American Armed Forces abroad.
Right. Yes, for certain. One of the things, though, when I got an opportunity to take the team overseas, it was for 3 to 4 weeks. And that was in the 90s, we actually flew a show over Moscow.
Oh, wow.
So our main mission, the reason we exist, is to influence recruiting. So
I can see why.
So when the recruiting command says you're going out of the country for 3 weeks, that doesn't help us.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also ambassadors of goodwill, and we want to show the rest of the world what the capability of the American military is in a peaceful way,
a positive way.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, and so that's there. But we want to be working with the American public as much as we can.
Sure. Well, now I feel like there's sort of an inherent level of patriotic appeal to seeing the Blue Angels, which I could understand why that would give them an inherently positive view on the part of American citizens. We were speaking before we started this episode that I remember seeing, and it must have been you.
Yeah.
In '91, I remember going to McGee Tyson Airport in Knoxville with my parents and watching the Blue Angels fly. So I know what that experience is like from the perspective of an American. How are they received, or how were you received abroad?
Oh, we were extraordinarily well received. My team, there were a bunch of us who were over 6 feet tall, so we were kind of like giants in some of these areas, right? Even in Russia, where we towered over most of the pilots there and most of the people there. But they saw us not just physically as giants, but as a product of America. And we are, believe it or not, the envy of most of the world, as much as some people try to deny that because of our freedoms that we have, our opportunities we have, and that we can achieve truly exceptional results and things.
Now, I was thinking about this earlier, and it for some reason, thinking about the Blue Angels and about flying a fighter jet made me think of NASCAR, and I'll get there. Specifically thinking in terms of people who are armchair NASCAR fans think, well, I drive a car. How hard can it be? And I think there's a misperception of the physicality involved in operating a vehicle at speed. I've never done it, so I'm not speaking from any level of personal experience, but talk about the amount of physical requirement of operating a fighter jet, especially doing the kinds of maneuvers that the Blues do.
Yeah, the reflexes, the hand-eye coordination, crucial. And then another thing that comes in that you don't see in any place else in the world is the G tolerance, the forces of gravity. So we're all sitting around now listening to the radio, watching TV, whatever we're doing, we're at 1 G, right? One force of gravity that holds us to the earth so we don't float up in the air. In flying, when you're going straight and level, you're at 1 G. When you put the airplane in an angle of bank, the airplane loses some of the lift created by the wings on the body of the airplane. And now you have to, in order to keep that same altitude, you have to increase the G forces. So, or if you want to pull up real hard and go against the gravity, so you're defying gravity the whole time, a lot when you're doing these maneuvers. And so that is probably the hardest thing to do, and that's not that you can't experience in anything else other than flying. The most gravity G-force you'll get driving a race car is probably about 1.7 Gs, mm-hmm. right? We're up at 6, 7, 7.5 Gs, wow. And that with that comes the risk of blacking out. So you learn how to develop that G tolerance. We showed that effectively in the movie when we showed the centrifuge training, which is that spinning cockpit, if you will, on a stick, mm-hmm. simply put, creating G forces up to 7.5 Gs. Wow. And blacking out new Blue Angel pilots. So again, these aren't pilots fresh off the farm. Mm-hmm. These are men and women that have flown a lot in the Navy, but now they're into a situation where they're going a sustained maybe 6, 7 Gs, and they have to learn how to tolerate it and overcome it to maintain control of the airplane. So that is a big difference then from NASCAR or driving down I-10 or I-5 or whatever sure. Highway you're on. That is a huge difference in the speed that you're going. You don't get that kind of speed in a car.
Sure. So and you mentioned the training. So the Blue Angels film is, I think the thing that brings people in is undoubtedly the shots of the planes flying. But a huge component of the story isn't really about what's happening in the air. Talk about the emphasis that's placed on the things that you've mentioned, like team building and preparing to go right. to take off.
Yeah. The bond you have to build between each other on the team has to be solidly based around trust and the expectation that no matter what happens out there, your wingmen are going to be with you and take care of you and make you aware of things that you may not see. Crucial. So, it's just the epitome of that trust that allows you to do crazy things, do things that are seemingly over the top, impossible. But what it teaches you is that you can achieve levels of performance that you never thought you could. When I came to the Blue Angels, my first flight, they blacked me out in the back seat of a two-seater. And I was, frankly, my beliefs in myself went way downhill, and the fact that I could actually do the job. But then with the encouragement and coaching of those around me, and knowing that many had gone before me and succeeded, I rededicated myself to getting it done. But it relies a lot on the friendships and the camaraderie and the trust you develop.
Now, you led the Angels, I'm going to keep going back and forth.
That's fine.
You led the team
Yep.
for 3 different tours, has that ever happened before?
No, it hasn't. And I think that's a good thing, because it's usually not for a good reason that you get called back. I like to joke and say that I got three tries to get it right. So, but you don't like to see that happen, but if it has to, it does. We like to think that situations won't create those openings, those unexpected openings. So I don't think it'll ever happen again, and I'm hopeful of that.
Now, you were, I think, described as having a heart-driven approach to leadership of the team. So explain what that means and how that was reflected in your approach to taking charge of the team.
I think perhaps, and I can just tell you the way I looked at life. Not so much that it was, I've got to do a heart-driven approach. It was caring for the people that worked with me, around me, and for me, making sure that they were moving ahead in life, that the problems they had to deal with, we'd try to help them find ways to accomplish that and not let it be too big of a distraction, because in the Blue Angel world, that was an issue. Any world, that's an issue. Mm-hmm. To create it from being too big of a distraction, finding ways to help, loving each other. I mean, just genuinely caring about what kind of outcomes your wingmen would have, or the people that worked for you would have, trying to get them able to move ahead and with training, and just not as a mission, but as a genuine bit of compassion. And I felt that for the people that worked around me and for me.
Why do you think that approach resonated so strongly with the Angels?
I think because when you care about people, they'll want to do the best possible job they can when you show, and part of that caring is respect. So if you can show respect, those folks that are working around you, first of all, will feel like they have a sense of ownership in the outcomes because you respect what they did. And then when you have a good air show, they own a piece of that, because whatever their job was, no matter how menial, if you want to call it that, and no job is menial, but
out of the spotlight.
Yeah, out of the spotlight, exactly. I used to talk about so you respect them for that, and they feel like they have a piece of that this is partially because of me. I used to talk about there was an expression about thunder and lightning, right? In the high performance, the visible, the shiny, flashy part of an endeavor could be a sales team with the product out in front of them, or the manufacturing folks behind that product. So you've got the lightning and you've got the thunder. So the lightning is what sits out for everybody to see, but the thunder is the force, right? It's kind of the force behind it. So you got to take care of the thunder in order to have lightning.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's almost like you should do motivational speaking.
I'm blessed with the opportunity to do that.
So this film, I could see it, as I mentioned, the aeronautic element of it is, I think, what's going to get people in the door. But I think it sounds like the message that we've been talking about just now about team building and trust and engendering that kind of an atmosphere is almost as strong a takeaway. Is that what you hope people leave the theater taking with them? Is the awe of seeing these maneuvers and being in the cockpit with of these Hornets, but also walk away with this sense of how important trust is and team building is?
Yeah, absolutely, Casey. I want them to see that there's a lot of might and flash and excitement in the flying. But they also should realize and want their hearts to be warmed by the interactions, by the accomplishments of people that are afraid, and worried, and to see them overcome that and see them propel themselves ahead in life and do things that they never thought they could. And so but that's part of just being in the Blue Angels and what the Blue Angels do. You want to give young people that hope and the dream of what's out there ahead, that don't let something that's seemingly impossible stop you. Take that challenge and go for it. So that's what I want people to see in the movie as human beings overcoming their fears and exceeding the limits of human endeavor.
Speaking from my own personal experience, having seen them when I was little, and I'm almost certain that I had a Blue Angels poster in my bedroom for years. and even if I didn't, I remember the sense that those pilots were almost super heroic.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that one thing that you want people to take away from this is an element that makes them seem more human.
Yeah.
That brings them a little bit more down to earth.
Well said, because when you watch the Blue Angels, you're seeing a machine in the sky, not necessarily seeing the sweat and worry and the outcomes of a tremendous amount of training and trust and all those human elements. You're seeing a physical element out there. So you watch the team fly, oh, that was exciting. That's pretty cool what they can do. But when you see the movie, like you said, well said, you can see the people that are involved. And there's more than the Lightning, the 6 pilots. There's the 120 or so of the finest men and women in the Navy Marine Corps out there working their tails off because they own that outcome. They're the thunder, right? And so you get to see that in the movie.
All right. Now, I could see how, given the amount of preparation that we've already kind of talked on and touched on that goes into every flight of the Blues, is there any possibility when you do something so many times, it's easy to almost go into autopilot? Is that ever a risk when you're a pilot of the Blues, or is it necessary, given what you're doing, to constantly be present of mind?
Usually the elements are changing so much. The weather changes, the obstacles change. So we brief that. We do risk mitigation. We make that a huge part of getting ready to go. But things change all the time. You have to be ready to accommodate what's coming up in front of you. So it's an environment that certainly you could possibly get. The word we like to use is complacent. Mm-hmm. And with complacent, there's danger, Will Robinson. There's danger, mm-hmm. With complacency. That's one reason why we keep the length of the tour down to 2 years. So the pilots don't become complacent. They don't lose the other part of the role to be genuinely interested in people and having that ability to pull people in when you chat with them and show your concern for them and your friendship for them. And after 2 years, when you've shaken 1,000 hands, and signed 5,000 autographs, you could possibly lose that. The
zeal might go away.
Yes, sir. That's it. Good word. Yeah.
So the film, what is it about the Blue Angels as a unit and the organization that you think translates so well to IMAX, to the giant screen format?
Well, just think of the power of the airplanes and the beauty of the airplanes and the dynamics of the maneuvering. If you can put that into IMAX and have that fill your whole hemisphere, it's just terrific. And in the the institutional version, which is what we're talking about, that shows in IMAX theaters and museums, it's not only released this week, not only IMAX, but 3D. Mm-hmm. So that's something no one's ever seen it in 3D before.
Including you, I think.
No,
right?
I have not, and I'm going to get to see it tonight for the first time.
That's right, because we got you before, we're speaking before you've actually had a chance to present after the debut of the film at our IMAX 3D theater on, what is today, the 23rd?
Yeah, it was on the 17th, I think, is when it first came
okay, well, but our premiere at our theater,
ours is
January 23rd.
Our viewing tonight, they don't call it a viewing.
Screening,
that's right. Thank you. Tonight is just part of this bringing it out and letting people see it, and then with me being there, being able to chat with them and maybe answer some questions.
What's the most common question you get, maybe from young people in particular, since you mentioned that young people are an important component of the blues audience?
How fast can you go? Or how fast do you go?
It was on my list of questions, but I didn't ask it yet.
We can go up to the sound barrier.
Which is 700
It just depends on the temperature outside, but around 700 miles an hour.
Okay, that's pretty fast.
And you don't want to exceed that because it creates a boom, that shock wave from that breaking the speed of sound, and it can knock out windows and do other things we don't want to have happen.
So the blues are based out of Pensacola, is that right?
Correct.
You ever get in trouble for accidentally breaking the sound barrier near Pensacola?
No, but it's happened before out in El Centro, California, where we do our winter training, because we're out in the desert and there's nobody around. So sometimes we'll sneak in a pass like that could technically get us in trouble. I've heard stories just since I've been here this week of one of the other service branches that has a demonstration team exceeding the speed of sound and having to write a big check for all the windows blown out in the area that they were flying in.
Is it the Thunderbirds?
The Thunderbirds.
Okay. That's what the Army's?
Air Force.
Air Force is,
Yeah,
that's flight,
yeah.
Okay.
The Army has a parachute team called the Golden Knights, and they do
Okay.
some really cool stuff.
Okay. Now, since you have not had a chance to see this, and our time is running short, so I'll have this be the last question that we ask, but what are you most excited about seeing, what's in the film, so what are you most excited about seeing on an 89-foot, 6-story screen like ours? What moment is going to be like the IMAX moment for you?
I think, you can see the interactions with people, and that was developed really wonderfully for the movie. But just the airplanes ripping around the sky, using that Phantom camera that has thousands of frames per second, and bringing the airplanes into slow motion, and just seeing the dynamic of it with the vapors coming off the airplane, and it's just terrific. That's what I like about it. IMAX.
Well, you've got me excited. Well, boss, in the interest of your time, which I know is precious today, we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode, but thank you so much for taking the time to come in and talk to us.
My pleasure, Casey. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
And now, if you have any ideas for a future episode of the podcast, or maybe even a question for the boss, send it along to podcast@tnaqua.org, and we'll see if we can get it answered. While you're online doing that, please take a moment and leave a review for the show, or if you don't have much time, give us a rating. Both of those are great ways to support the show and help us out with the algorithm. And in the meantime, until next time, remember that every drop matters.